Well, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is coming out this June, and everyone has their own thoughts on this movie and how they feel about the trailer. I know I do. But since I already talked about all four of the movies, and with this new one coming out, I thought maybe it's time that I finally finish the young Indiana Jones Chronicles from the early 90s. So I guess I'll just give a brief history on this. So during the sets of, the Indiana Jones trilogy, George Lucas was asked what was Indiana Jones like before he was. And so George Lucas basically designed a series that was an educational program for children and teenagers spotlighting historical figures and important events. And every episode had this formula of it would open up with a elder Indiana Jones, played by Canadian actor George Hall, would, in a present day in the 90s, would encounter someone and he would reminisce about his past and would tell that person, like, what happened. And then the show was eventually canceled, but there was 4 TV movies that were made. And when it got released to VHS, they all got released 22 episodes when there was like about 31 episodes. They all got, every VHS tape got the episodes, 2 episodes edited together into making it a whole 1 hour, over an hour, and 30-minute event. This has stayed that way for every single release. Not joking. You cannot watch an episode of Indiana Jones without George Hall, unless it's a bootleg, unofficial release. So yeah, every episode of VHS basically cut out George Hall's scene. And so I did watch, because someone edited together all the bookends with George Hall, and I think it was for the best. I guess it was partially due to the fact that they were making a 4th Indiana Jones movie with an elder Harrison Ford, so I guess some of the stuff wouldn't make sense, because he has a daughter, I know, and there would be no mention of Mutt, which people don't care about Mutt and would wish they forget about Mutt, but that's a different topic. And I think overall, I think it was fine that they just cut it out, but we'll talk about one problem with these 1 hour edited cuts, but overall it was stupid, the fact that they just edit all 2 episodes together. Some it made sense, but most of them it did not. So this is basically going to be a 3-part series, because even though this went for 1 season, but that a bunch of episodes, as I'm talking about all the edited cuts, they all go through 3 phases. So today, in this video, we're going to be talking about the early years episodes. Next will be the war years, when it's basically about him in World War I as a spy and soldier. And then there's the years of change, which has episodes about jazz and Hollywood. And we'll get to that one eventually. So let's get right into the beginning of the show, the early years, when Indiana Jones was played by Corey Carrier from the Pinocchio movie by Steve Barron, starting with the first episode, My First Adventure. My First Adventure, or how the original episode title was called The Curse of the Jackal, this segment was first directed by Jim O'Brien, who did the Rebecca miniseries with Charles Dance and Faye Dunaway, and was written by George Lucas. And so this episode originally was narrated by George Hall for the opening prologue. But then, when they did the rewrites, they had Corey Carrier, who was a lot older at this point, narrate over it. And this is where you get introduced to, his life in Princeton, even though I thought it was Utah in Last Crusade. And this is about his life with his dad, played by Clyde Owens, who would go on to be in another prequel show. And his mother, was in Delta Force 2. And that's what I could find. But this is how this is like set up that these episodes are going to be about Indy. Basically, his family, his father goes around the world giving lectures, and they go for 2 or 3 years around the world. And they go to England, and he gets a tutor, Seymour, who was a mentor for Henry Jones Sr. This actress was in 2001: A Space Odyssey and Clockwork Orange, so that's the kind of the biggest stuff I noticed. But in this one, they go right to Egypt for the first one, and he joins T. Lawrence, another former student of Miss Seymour. They kind of go on this archaeological dig, Indy and Miss Seymour, where on this mummy site, and a mummy disappears, and there's sort of this murder mystery that happens. And while there's a bit of a cliffhanger to this episode, and but it does get resolved, just not in the second segment for some reason. But I think for the first one, it is pretty good. It's a mummy episode. It actually is what gets Indiana Jones interested in archaeology. And I like it. It's an actual good first episode. And then the second one is about how the second one, which was directed by Michael Schultz, who did The Last Dragon, Car Wash, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which I hear is awful. Now, and this one was made way after, which goes into the issue with the show. They did some reshoots to connect these episodes with, these early episodes with Corey Kerr. And you can tell from times that he is 10 in the episode. And then in these, and then during, they have these scenes where they're, connecting, their travels. And you can tell he aged. And then he goes back from being 10 years old. It's really distracting and not a good idea on Lucas's part. But that's Lucas. He changes everything. This show should have been a warning sign for the special editions. But in this one, he meets up. His family goes to Tanger's, and the family meets up with Henry Sr.'s a former classmate called Walter Harris, played by Kevin McNally, Mr. Gibbs from the Pirates movies. And then, and while they're there, Indy befriends a slave named Omar. And him and Omar end up getting into a trade ring. And this episode is mostly for teach people that slavery is bad. I mean, I think they do a good job, but the whole issue is that when Indy gets back, it's like after this, Henry Sr. should be like, okay, you're going back home. After when your son gets into a slave ring, it's like, no, you're going back home. The rest of the world, you're not ready to be for the rest of the world. You and your mother are going back to Princeton. That's it. But no, they go to Africa in the next segment or wherever they go next. I don't know. But yeah, for the first part of my first adventure, I like the first segment, but the second segment, it's just kind of mid. So, on to the next one. Passion for Life. Passion for Life. The first segment was directed by Carl Schultz of The Seventh Sign with Demi Moore and Michael Biehn. Yeah, that's it. So this one is now Indy and his family go to Africa, to a camp that has Theodore Roosevelt, who's hunting animals for museums, but the one that he cannot find is an oryx. And Indy befriends an African kid named Meto, who can help him find it, and Indy does get lost again. Seriously, I think Henry Sr. should have reconsidered bringing him. But that's really it for this African segment. There's not much to it. It's just trying to find the oryx, and the actor playing Theodore Roosevelt's cool, and the actor and this has Paul Freeman in this one, who kind of plays the character that was the inspiration for Alan Quatermain, who was partially inspiration for Indiana Jones. So it's a fun thing having Paul Freeman in it. But overall, it's just not much to it. It has a fun idea, but it's just it's not really Indiana Jones. And so then Indy and his family go to Paris, and again, Corey Carrier ages between going to Africa, and then Dee ages when going to France. In this one, his parents leave, and it's with him and his tutor. And they go to an art museum, and there they meet a young Norman Rockwell. This happens a lot in the show. And there, Norman Rockwell and Indy, they sneak off from Miss Seymour to go to a kind of like an underground restaurant place where there is Pablo Picasso and Degas. There's going to be a lot of conveniences in this show. And so there's a whole thing about Indy and Norman Rockwell going to all these parties with Pablo Picasso, seeing French culture. There's a lot of bar fights with women, prostitutes. It's really crazy. And again, Indiana Jones leaves, goes missing again, but his parents never find out about this. It is a good this one does have its fun moments. I do like the actor who plays Pablo Picasso. And I should have also said this was directed by another guy who did French stuff. But again, this episode to me, it's just like where the show. I don't like most of the kid episodes. They kind of suck. This episode it's just not much to write home about. I guess just watch the French segment. It's good. It has its fun moments, but yeah, not much to write home about. Perils of Cupid. The first one in Vienna was directed by Billy August of the Les Miserables film from 1998 that had Liam Neeson, Uma Thurman, Claire Danes, Geoffrey Rush. In this one, it's in Vienna, and it's where Indy falls in love with Princess Sophia of Austria, daughter of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who got shot and was the start of World War I. This one has Max von Sydow as Sigmund Freud in a scene that's not what you expect from an Indiana Jones show for kids.
Is single, all things by law divine. In one another's being mingle.
This child can understand what Jung is talking about. I tell you, children's minds are incredible.
But where exactly does love come into all that?
Sex. That's where love comes into all of that, young man.
Please, Sigmund.
No. The boy asked a question. All love is derived from the need for sexual gratification. Even this boy's love of his mother.
This episode, it goes into the problem with prequels is that they mention something that's never been mentioned in the stuff that happens like further in the timeline. Like Indiana Jones never talks about the fact that he met the princess that was the daughter of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, fell in love with her. She was in love with him. Never mentioned again. It doesn't make any sense. And she never comes back. even though in the George Hall cut, he says that he met her eventually. Again, why they cut it out, because it just doesn't make any sense. Because, like, don't expect... I don't really think Dial of Destiny is going to have any mentions to this show. But, just overall, it does have a cool... There's this fun moment, Indiana Jones sneaking around the palace. Just kind of funny, just how the little kid was able to break into the palace and not any of the Serbians that wanted to kill the Archduke. That part is fun, and I guess the chemistry between Corey and this Danish actress, I can't pronounce her name, who plays Sophie, it's good, it's cute, but again, they never mention this woman again. And it's also kind of stated that Indy always loved Marion in Crystal Skull. So I guess Indy just kind of forgot about this woman. Even though she does her locket thing, makes another appearance in further episodes. And that's all we see of her. So then they go to Florence, Italy. And this segment was directed by Mike Newell, who did Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Donnie Brasco, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and Prince of Persia. In this one, the focus from Indiana Jones shifts right towards his mother, who falls in love with a opera composer named Mr. Puccini, while Henry Sr. is away. And that's the episode, really. It's just the mother falls in love with Mr. Puccini falls in love with the mother, and of course, like, the mother doesn't go with him. I mean, I guess, like, it could have worked, actually, because it is interesting how, like, Indiana Jones in, like, Last Crusade says how, like, his obsession with the Crusade was something that he never got, including his, like, mother.
This is an obsession, Dad. I never understood it. Never.
Neither did Mom. Oh, yes, she did. Only too well. Unfortunately, she kept her illness from me. So all I could do was mourn her.
So that could have maybe worked, but never really talk about, and Henry Sr. never talks about the, Crusades or the Holy Grail. He never shows any interest in that. In this episode, overall, it's meant to be like a romance episode, and it's not really Indiana Jones-like, which sucks. So, next one is Travels with Father. So, Travels with Father, this was the first of the, like, TV movies that we're talking about in this, like, new orderly timeline. And, even though it's a TV movie, it's not, like, one consistent story. It's still cut into 2 movies. So, like, the first half is in Russia, and it's not the father part, where, he travels with Father. No, he travels with Alfred Pennyworth from Batman, as he plays Leo Tolstoy. I want to say that's how I say the name right. Tolstoy? So yeah, Michael Goth plays Russian guy, and it's really obvious that it's an Englishman being Russian. Look, thing about British people is that not all of them can do Russian accents as well as Kenneth Branagh. But at the same time, Michael Goth is not as terrible at that accent as Ray Winston in Black Widow. But anyway, yeah, it's Indiana Jones. He runs away from his family again, showing how the father should just send him back to America. It's because the little shit keeps running off. He runs off, and he goes with Tolst. Like, he stumbles around Tolst, and I think their chemistry, with Corey and Michael Goth, it is really good. And Michael Goth is really great, of course. And this gives you like historical background on just how terrible the Russian government was even before it was communist with the with like the secret police. But that's really it. I actually do like this part. It's, even though it's not very Indiana Jones, I do kind of like the idea of just like a young boy and an old man, and an old man that's like just like hates how his like family doesn't care for him, and he hates his like his writing because he's like because he plays like a famous author, and I like that aspect. But then they go to Greece. The Greece segment was directed by Dipa Mehta, who's mostly done Indian films. This is where him traveling with his father takes place, and it's basically them going through Greece, learning about philosophy, as Henry Sr. has to go to a Greek monastery on a mountain, while Miss Seymour is sick and his mother is off at a spa for a day. I don't know. And as they leave, there's this like contraption that's like the way you get up to the mountains, and it stops because something happens, and it's during a day where everyone is silent. So that's like the big adventure thing, and there are some like really intense moments. But overall, Travels with Others, I guess it's like one of the better of the kid episodes, up there with My First Adventure. It's got some good moments with him and Henry Sr. and Henry Jr. that I do like. But we'll talk later about how the events in the show with the father is. But so that's it. Now on to the last of the kid ones, Journey of Radiance. This episode was directed again by Michael Schultz. So right off the bat, the opening, the first one in India, is unironically directed by the same woman who did the Greek segment, Deepa Mehta. And this is basically like, so they're in India and they come across this like organization that's pretty controversial because they have these like theories about like they believe in the idea of like theosophy, which is like the connection of all religions. And so they think that they have found this Messiah, but they go into a lot of just how like there's like a lot of corruption in this like religious society that like Miss Seymour finds out, but Indiana Jones goes kind of like on this journey with this kid that this organization feels like is the Messiah and teaches him all about religion. And this kind of is the part where you see like just how much of a program show for kids it is. And that's just really it. I mean, it definitely shows interesting ideas of like, they could have like done a more interesting way of like showing how like this is what the Indiana Jones universe is where like all sorts of crap exists, like Christianity, Buddhism. That's what it could have been, and I don't think they don't go that far with it. And then the next one is in China. This was directed by Gavin Miller. And in this one, it's like Henry Sr. goes off somewhere else in China to lecture. And it's Henry, his mom, Miss Seymour, and a interpreter go out like sightseeing, learning stuff about China, till they get a thief. A thief comes around and makes them stranded, and Indy is sick, like really bad sick, and lives in a house with with this Chinese family. And there's like some history about like, I guess like what was like leading up to the Chinese Revolution with Mao Zedong. There's kind of that, I guess, hinted in it. And we actually like find out that Indy actually had a sister, which was never brought up in any of the movies ever. And wish that was brought up. Overall, again, it's just, I think looking at the kid stuff, I don't think that it should have been added. I think they just should have gone right to his teen years because it's just not that interesting. And like, there's no action or adventure besides in the Paris episode. So as we kind of like leave, I guess like all I can recommend for like the child episodes is just watch My First Adventures and Travels with Father. That's the only ones I feel like that are worth watching. So now we go on to Spring Break Adventure. This one was directed first by Joe Johnston, who I think we should all know what Joe Johnston did. He did The Rocketeer, Jurassic Park 3, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and Captain America the First Avenger. Great director, and this is definitely one of the better episodes. I really like this episode. This one is about, so Indy is now grown up and has like a girlfriend named Nancy, and they want to go to prom, but her dad's like car is broken down, and so they're trying to find a way to fix the car up. But so like one night, Indy has this dinner with like a bunch of his father's colleagues, and one of his colleagues like works for Thomas Edison, and Indy thinks that he could go to this guy to help fix the motor. He agrees, but then when he gets there, some type of form of industrial espionage takes place, and then we come across a young Clark Gregg, Phil Coulson. So he's in this episode, and there's basically Indy and Nancy kind of like go on this fun like adventure, trying to like figure out what's the mystery, and there's cops and all that. There's action in this one. There's actually like action with gunshots, and it's actually fun. I really enjoy this part of the segment. But then here's just the thing about Spring Break Adventure. So Spring Break Adventure is like next. It's the next segment. But this part, doesn't fit with the rest of the series. Like, because, with the first stuff with like when he was a kid, that all like fits because it's like consistent, like it's him going around the world. And then in the next episode, so this is where he goes to Mexico, and he ends up getting into the Mexican Revolution with Pancho Villa, and also you see Patton, and also he gets introduced to his sort of brief like foreign sidekick Remy from Belgium, who married someone from Mexico, and I think the Mexican government took it away from him. And the interesting thing about this one, this is the only episode that ever gets mentioned in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
I rode with Pancho Villa. A couple of his guys spoke it.
Bullshit.
You asked.
Pancho Villa.
Technically, I was kidnapped.
By Pancho Villa.
It was a fight against Victoriano Huerta.
How old were you?
Not your age.
Parents must have had a cow, huh?
It worked out things were a little tense at home.
And this show is probably going to get the same like treatment as like the Star Wars Expanded Universe got, where they're just gotta like ignore all of that, and they're just going to ignore this show. But then at the same time, I don't think anyone really watched this show. I don't know who really watched the show. Like, I talked to my English teacher, and he's like, yeah, I watched it for like a hot minute. But this is where the episode, the show, it becomes mostly about Indy in like war. And this like, it all sets up his relationship with Remy, and I actually do like the character of Remy. Even though it's like a stock foreign character, he's definitely got a lot of fun charm to him. And I think him and, Indy have really great chemistry together. So, it's I think the Mexican Revolution episode is actually really good. I do like, it actually concludes, because when I said before about the Curse of the Jackal episode, this would air right after the Curse of the Jackal episode, the very first episode. Because the show was released, not chronologically ordered. So, they ended that timeline. And, overall, I do like this episode. I think it is really good. It's one of the ones to watch. But then, the next one is just none of that. So for the last of the early years, we have Love's Sweet Song. So the first segment is in Ireland. This was directed by Giles McKinnon, who did Twist of Fate with Steve Martin. And in this one, it's Indiana Jones and Remy. They go to Ireland to make some money to go to Britain to sign up for the Belgian army. And then Indy kind of like falls in love with this girl whose brother is like part of like a, the Irish like rebellion against Britain. And also the actor John Lynch was another movie about like Irish independence, In the Name of the Father, with Daniel Day-Lewis and Pete Postlethwaite. And just kind of like a romance for the most part, but then it just turns into like a war part where there's like fighting in the streets against the British. And it's definitely got a lot of other characters. Like there's this playwright character who wants Ireland to be socialist. This one, there's not much to this episode, just because it's like a bunch of like characters. Kind of maybe a little Richard Linklater, but yeah. And then they go to Britain in the next segment. Again, be directed by Carl Schultz, and is famous because it has Felicity Shagwell herself, Elizabeth Hurley, as this like suffragette bus woman. And Indy falls in love with her because he kind of wants to find a woman before he goes off to war. And again, this one's, unlike the last one, this one goes heavy on like the romance. Because they spend most of their days in like London. Miss Seymour actually comes back in this episode. And we see Winston Churchill, who is made out to be sexist. And and it also has Max. What's her name? Vanessa? I don't know. So it has Max from Mission Impossible 1, who was also like a suffragette who was actually force-fed. But overall, this was this one like in the George Hall cut. This one like actually had it actually end where at the bookend, old Indy actually meets up with old Felicity Shagwell named Vicky, and it's a nice closure. But in this like new continuity, we'll never know if they'll ever like see each other again. And that's about it. So it ends off with Indy and Remy going off to war. So next time, guys, we will look at the war era of this season 1 of Young Indiana Jones. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.